Hello, I'm Kads and welcome to today's video. We're continuing on the train of challenge tournaments, and this particular iteration is a spider tournament featuring only the corrupted factions. So for anyone who is unfamiliar, we can check it out in the tournament tab whenever it decides to load, but the corrupted alliance is the Dark Elves, Demon Spawn, Undead Hordes, and the Knights Revenant. Now thankfully, as we'll get into, these factions are quite useful in terms of coming up with teams specifically for the Spider's Den, so this is probably one of the best forms of this challenge, or these challenge types of tournaments, being the corrupted being featured specifically in Spider. So once again, in terms of rewards, there is no summon pool or soul summon pool going on right now, so there's no prison jewels or prison fragments up for grabs. There's also no void shard, but there is half of a primal shard, which can be fairly lucrative depending on, your RNG, but the more the better when it comes to any and all shard types. And of course, you could always have the potential, depending on the ease or difficulty of your group, of getting some 6-star relentless gear. Now I always say when it comes to spider tournaments, and I alluded to this a bit earlier, it is typically the easiest form that's the most accessible to the most people, therefore they're going to be naturally more competitive, so just keep that in mind. But always check your group. You never know, you might have an easy one. In this case, you can see that literally I guess we're on the second day now, but people are already well beyond the maximum reward. So for me in particular, this is not going to be a time for me to fight to try and get the top spot. There are plenty of other easier tournaments that I could potentially win to get myself some relentless gear. In terms of the stages that I would recommend you guys run, I do always default to starting by saying that it's easier to do this on normal mode depending on the level of your roster. I do have a hard mode 10 team that I plan to showcase in today's video, but nonetheless, depending on where you are in the game, it might be, or it should be, substantially easier to do this type of stuff on normal mode. And as a refresher, stage 25 gives you the best gear quality for normal mode. Stage 20 gives you the best balance of points per energy, or the most efficient return in terms of points per energy, which is kind of ideal for short-term tournaments such as these that kind of pop up every few weeks or so. And then stage 16 is always a good mention because it is much easier to do, and you still have a chance to get 6-star gear, and you can basically just start or keep killing the spiderlings and not have to worry about HP burn and the tank and burn type strategies that we'll showcase for the later stages of Spider. So for starters, we'll begin with the stage 25 team, and this is a fairly accessible team with one major swap, mind you, but nonetheless, this is kind of like mid to late game type of teams that you might have. Multiple cold hearts, of course, an HP burn champion. I have Tyrant Ixelmore, but this is easily going to be replaced by Akoth the Seared. Since I had Tyrant from a very early time, I never needed to build Akoth when he came out specifically for any of these types of tournaments, so I've just never personally built him, but effectively he's the same thing in this slot. AoE HP burn. Attract the Wendering comes in as our control champion for the AoE freeze, but this could just as easily have been like a miscreated monster for the big shield, someone to protect your team and control the spiderlings while they burn. And then adding in the cold hearts technically is not necessary. You can run just a tank and burn pure strat, and you can run 3 food champions. Granted, they would still need to be from the corrupted alliance, so bear that in mind if you want to do that. But still having a control champion and an HP burn champion, it'll still take about 90 seconds to 2 minutes or so, and you'll still get the win. So that is an option that you can employ. But if you want to farm it a bit faster, then we can bring in the double cold hearts to reduce the turn meter of the boss, but also do the enemy max HP damage. Granted, it is capped on stage 25. And then Renegade in there, of course, the reset champion, so that we can do everything over again. Let's go ahead and run this team for you guys. It is fairly straightforward. We just kind of burn, control, enemy max HP, reset, and then we do it all again. Now, of course, this is not going to be a full reset. It is Renegade after all, so don't expect it to be like an instant type deal. But, within like a minute or so, we should be able to get all the way through the boss. So one of my cold hearts, we'll go through the builds later on, but one of them is in reflex, so there is a chance that she can use her heart seeker immediately, the one we just saw. But ordinarily, it would be on their second turn after Renegade does the reset, just the nature of her cooldown reduction. So we're combining the two strategies. It's a tank and burn by preventing the spiderlings from taking a turn and keeping them under the freeze and allowing the burns to do their damage, but also adding in the turn meter control from the cold hearts as well as the enemy max HP hits just to do that much damage. But you can see there we're absolutely decimating the boss, and a couple more burn ticks will basically take care of her. So 1 or 2 more should do it, or Hey, we got a Heart Seeker there from the Reflex Cold Heart, so she kind of reduced her cooldowns and came back around to it. But yeah, just under a minute, pretty quick run, fairly accessible team. Again, this role or the slot here could easily just be Akoth the Seared, which you get for free from Doom Tower's normal secret rooms. Obviously, you would need 2 Cold Hearts to pull this off, but nonetheless, this could be done with 1 Cold Heart. The main damage here overall is going to be the AoE HP burn, as you can see by the multi-million amount of damage on the HP burn champion. But in my case, thankfully, I don't have to run stage 25. I built a team for hard mode stage 10, and you can see it here, which is more or less the same as my original team. It just so happens that a lot of my champions that I use on that particular squad are from the Corrupted Alliance, but I didn't have Artak available, the other AoE HP burner, and so I had to make a swap. And in this case, I just threw in a nuker, which in this case is my White King Narcisse. So this is a hybrid of HP burn activation, but also relying a little bit on poison damage. So we have Drang placing the irresistible HP burn, meaning it's going to be consistent every single run. He's always going to place it. No 3% resists on all the Spiderlings because he goes second on the team. Activated by Theodore. Tomb Lord puts out some poisons. Calvalax's passive put out some poisons. Calvalax does his slam, which scales up more towards enemy max HP damage with the amount of poisons on the target. So up to 8 or up to 9, depending on if he gets his extra poison from his passive, and then the extra nuke from White King Narcisse to kind of finish off any of the straggling spiders that are remaining. This is not a one-shot composition. The spider does take a turn, but she dies on the subsequent turn to all of the poisons that are stacked up on her. So it works. It's quick enough. It's somewhere around 30-ish seconds, and it's good enough for me, again, for this niche situation where we're just trying to beat the high stage possible while within the constraints of the challenge tournament. So I'll go ahead and run this team for you guys as well, just so you can see it in action. Obviously, a lot of you won't be able to recreate this one, but some of you might, and that's why we kind of do these videos, because you never know. A lot of people might have a lot of people do have a lot of different champions. So we get the poisons out there, HP burn, activation, Calvalax does a slam. It's expected that many of the Spiderlings will survive. We kill majority of them. I think 2 of them lived because they freshly spawned and they're just full health. Doesn't matter if Calvalax dies, doesn't matter if Tomb Lord dies, we already have all of the poisons on the boss. Like, so many poisons that Theodore doesn't even place anything on his next turn, and the Spiderling or the Spider Queen just dies from the poisons. And also, we don't really have to worry about anything else. Like, even if the spider was to somehow survive all the poison ticks, maybe we just got really unlucky with the crit or with the damage from the 2 nukers. If she got a subsequent turn after that turn, she would still die to the rest of the poisons, because her turn right then, she wouldn't actually consume all the Spiderling because she already did that. So pretty solid team. Again, just taking around 30 seconds or so, which is effectively how long my normal team would take in the niche situation where I don't get enough poisons out of the beginning at a Tomb Lord and Calvalax's passive, and he just doesn't hit as hard initially. This is basically how long that team would take to run, around 30 seconds. So it's as bad as my normal team when it has bad RNG, which for me is totally acceptable, again, for a temporary tournament, temporary team. So real quickly, let's go through the builds on this champion, starting from the first team, and we have my Renegade, who's notably and has always been 5-star on my account. I've never had a reason to take her to 6-star because she's never needed to really live in any particular composition, but I digress. So she's in a shield set and a life set. Bear in mind her stats are going to be fairly low because she is 5-star. So 35k on the HP, 1.8k on the defense, but more importantly, just 211 on the speed. So fast enough for the content that I need to use her in, and then 289 accuracy, which is more than enough for normal mode type dungeons. For the blessing, and I obviously happened to get a 5-star soul for her, I just went with Nature's Bounty, so it has a chance to change her decrease speed and decrease accuracy into the big versions if I ever have to use her A3, which is fairly rare, but nonetheless it is there. Your reduction is fine. And then masteries, undone, as you'd expect. She's only 5-star, so I haven't really needed to get her masteries. Cold Heart number 1, aka my utility Cold Heart, is in a reflex set and perception, and her total stats are as follows: 40k in the HP, 3.1k on the attack, 1800 on the defense, 254 on the speed, so fairly quick, 70 on the crit rate because that's all we need for the Heart Seeker, 223 on the crit damage, and then 381 on the accuracy. This is my, like I said, utility Cold Heart, so she's useful in like the Dark Fae and the reflex set, obviously, anything to reduce the cooldown of the Heart Seekers. So if I just need a plug and play enemy max HP single target champion, she's the one that slots in the team and just get as many Heart Seekers as possible by getting the cooldown reduction. Phantom Touch in case I need to run her in some form of Fire Knight in the Cursed City or anything like that, but also just more damage against like Dark Fae, stuff like that. And then for the masteries, kind of following the trend for like enemy max HP champions, ending on flawless execution for extra crit damage. Obviously, I could change her out to Giant Slayer, which is what a lot of endgame players do, but just because she's in a reflex set and her crit damage is not really amazing at like 220, I think it's just better for me to have that instead of having her be down at 200 crit damage, which is a bit on the lower side. For the support tree, a little bit of zigzagging back and forth, but just picking up some of the accuracy stuff along the way, and then ending on sniper to increase the chances of heal reduction on the A1. Cold Heart number 2 for me is exclusively for Scarab King, so she is in a destroy set, fairly old school build, because I know a lot of people just run like a Euros solo, but I've never been a fan of that type of composition. 43k on the HP, 3k on the attack, 1900 on the defense, 231 on the speed, so a little bit slower, 70 still on the crit rate, 255 on the crit damage, a little bit higher than utility Cold Heart, and then 351 precisely enough accuracy for Dune Tower Hard, again used in the Scarab King fight. The blessing is on Hero Soul. This is the Cold Heart that I typically use, if I have to use her outside of Scarab King, it's usually for some sort of challenge tournament like this one. And so she just gets a little bit of damage boost from having a bunch of minions specifically against the spider or something like that. And then for the masteries, they're basically identical to Cold Heart 1, except I didn't feel the need to finish it because, again, she's not my primary Cold Heart. She's the one I kind of fill in certain areas as needed. Achak the Wenderin, who I recently rebuilt into a 4-piece Merciless set, and so whenever he does damage with the A1 or the AoE freeze, there's a chance to get the reflex effect and reducing the cooldown of his freeze ability, which I basically did because of how I use him now in these challenge tournaments in Spider's Den. It just helps him cycle through the freeze more and more often. So total stats here are as follows: 58k on the HP, 3800 on the defense, 232 on the speed, and then 323 on the accuracy. So it's enough for him to also function in the Cursed City if need be against certain mobs who can actually be frozen. Otherwise, they'll get HP burn. Instead, for the blessing, I did go with cruelty because he does get, he's focusing on the AoE freeze on the A3 predominantly, and so he hits all targets, and thus it helps to reduce their defense a little bit. And then when it comes to mastery, he's more optimized for the fact that he has a freeze in his kit, so it is a 90% chance when booked, and so this brings it up with fearsome presence to 95% chance. So still not 100%, but it is slightly higher and just more likely for him to actually land the freeze. I do wish they would make that kind of like Stag Knight, where it's 95% chance when booked and then 100% with fearsome presence, but I digress. So yeah, defense tree zigzagging until we get down there, support tree kind of hugging the debuffer side, but also buffs and debuffs with arcane celerity, and the other one rapid response, just because he does both buffs and debuffs, and then evil eye and lore steel for a little bit of extra stats. Tyrant Ixelmore, nothing really fancy in his build, perception and speed, pretty basic sets. And then his stats are as follows: 70k on the HP, 3400 on the defense, 212 on the speed, and then 272 on the accuracy, which again is just enough to be used in normal mode dungeons, which is basically the only purpose for him on my account. Maybe some Cursed City stages where I can use the AoE HP burn. Blessing doesn't have one. And then masteries coming down the offense tree, fairly standard debuffer is Shroud on the offense tree, left hand side, ending on War Master as the T6, and then the support tree kind of splitting the uprights here by picking up both rapid response, arcane celerity once again, just because he does buffs and debuffs, but ending on lasting gifts because usually I allow him to use his ally protection ability, so he's also protecting the team, and getting it to last longer just means he can do his job a little bit better. So now moving on to the hard mode team champions, we have Tomb Lord starting things off, perception and resilience, nothing fancy again in his particular sets. 63k on the HP, 3300 on the attack, 2500 on the defense, 269 on the speed, full crit rate, a little bit of crit damage, and then 390 on the accuracy, which is most certainly overkill for even like Centranos and or hard mode dungeons, but nonetheless it suffices. For the blessing, I went with Phantom Touch because I do use him in hard mode Fire Knight, and so that just helps get a couple more pips into the shield whenever it procs. And then for the masteries, left hand side of the offense tree, because he's a debuffer as well, standard debuffer type, but banking over to the center for Giant Slayer because he does of course have a triple hitter on the A1. And then the support tree, mostly hogging the right hand side, but dropping back over to get Cycle of Magic, but most importantly ending on Master Hexer to extend the duration of all of his debuffs. Next up, Walking Tomb Drang in a smattering of gear, mainly just the speed set, one piece of Merciless, which is just kind of a coincidence, not really important, and then one piece of protection, so more or less just in a speed set. Total stats are as follows: 74k on the HP, 3200 on the defense, 253 on the speed, and then 506 on the resistance. So he is stacked to the nines with resistance because, of course, he doesn't need any accuracy in his kit. Lucky enough to get a blessing on him, and I just went with Intimidating Presence because I don't really need anything. He's not on any of my core teams anymore. He did used to be, but there wasn't really a useful blessing for him. Can't use Brimstone because he's not built with accuracy and stuff like that. For the masteries, pretty standard stuff coming down majority of the left-hand side of the offense tree, ultimately ending on War Master. He is a PvE champion, generally speaking. And then the defense tree, primarily because, again, he doesn't need any accuracy, but also if he gets Retribution hits after he places HP burn, then he has a chance to run in there and activate it on the A1, which can be very strong. Next up, we have Calvalex in Cruel, Perception, and Crit Damage. So a good mix of offensive and accurate gear. And I guess I'll mention, as I always do mention, that he is completely unbooked. I basically just use him for his passive, and then if I need his nuking A3, it's just kind of there, even though it could be having what, 20 or 30% more damage potentially. But I don't know, haven't really felt the need that he's worth the books. And yeah, so the build on him is as follows: 33k on the HP, 6.2 on the attack, 2700 on the defense, 237 on the speed, full crit rate 251 on the crit damage, and then 353 on the accuracy. Once again, precisely enough for hard mode dungeons. Again, I do use him on my primary Spider hard mode 10 team. For the blessing, I kind of flopped around for a while. He used to be in Soul Reap just because it would bring the big spider low potentially if he got enough of the poisons to proc, and he might also finish off some of the spiderlings that were left alive just with the Soul Reaper. But I ultimately ended up switching it over to Hero Soul, just kind of like the example I gave for the secondary Cold Heart that I have. He does more damage just for the spiderlings being alive, and so he hits his maximum potential, again unbooked, a lot more often with the flat damage boost increase or damage increase with each enemy from Hero Soul. So ideally I would get him to 4 stars eventually, just for that big bunch of crit damage, which would solidify the fact that he can get closer to the enemy max HP cap with his A3 ability. But now, for now, it's good enough. For the masteries, we opted for, again, focusing on the enemy max HP type of damage build on the offense tree. So kind of center stuff, nuking stuff, and then coming here and ending on flawless execution for extra crit damage, and then fairly standard debuffer stuff on the support tree, ultimately ending on sniper for the his passive placing poisons, and then master hexer, of course, to extend the duration of any and all poisons he places. Next up, we have my Theodore in his cracked out build, double perception and resistance set. He is built like a unit. 69k on the HP, nice. 3800 on the defense, 251 on the speed, so fairly quick. 464 on the resistance, so he is good enough to resist anything from hard mode dungeons, and then also 358 on the accuracy, which is enough to be able to place his debuffs against hard mode, specifically in the dragon where I do use him, and also in hard mode spider, as I mentioned. For the blessing, I was lucky enough to get a 4-star soul on him, and so I do have brimstone on him for that purpose. And then for the masteries, believe it or not, I did actually end up going with Oppressor. So effectively, he gets more turn meter fill for each active debuffs, and of course, if he's placing AoE poisons on a bunch of champions in a wave, that's going to equate to a lot more turns. So that's what I opted for. And then I used to use him in Ice Golem hard mode as well. He was swapped out for Gizmak, the Terrible, but even in that fight, obviously you can't poison the boss, but activating the HP burns was handy, and basically he needed some mastery that wasn't War Master in order to not trigger, or to be less likely to trigger the Retribution hits from the Ice Golem. And last up, we have the only PvP champion just being used because he was a convenient nuker for the time, my White King Narses in Savage, Perception, and then 1 piece of Stone Skin. Total stats are as follows: 105,000 on the HP, 3,100 on the defense, 233 on the speed, full crit rate 294 on the crit damage, and we don't really care about his accuracy or resistance. And 4-star is where he's at in terms of blessing so far, but I do intend to eventually get him all the way out to 6-star by using coins for essence. For the blessing, again, this is PvP focused. I do want him to stay alive as much as possible because I'm not a stone skin user / abuser, and so I do have Ward of the Fallen on him, so I get 2 stacks, which just helps him be a little bit tankier for some of those initial smacks. And then for the masteries, as you'd expect, he is built in a nuking capacity, so hugging kind of the left hand and the middle side of the offense tree, ultimately ending on Helm Smasher to combine with the effects of the Savage set. And then defense tree, kind of wobbling our way through Resurgent notably, just in case we want to cleanse some debuffs by taking damage. And then Retribution, of course, if he counterattacks often, he can just kill a nuker if he gets a counterattack off. But of course, those are only just a couple of examples of teams that you could use. So let's talk about, in general, the champions that would be good for this particular fight. Thankfully, there's not a ton to go over, and a lot of them do these same things because the things that you need for this fight are fairly consistent and straightforward. So HP burn champions, Demon Spawn happens to have a ton of them for some reason. I guess they're, Demon Spawn, Born of Fire, Born of Flame, I don't know, whatever they're going for. But Tyrant, of course, we mentioned. Sissia would be amazing because she can both place HP burns and also activate them. If I did have her, I would basically be able to recreate my existing stage 10 hard mode team. Instead of Artak, I could use Sissia and he would do the exact same thing as my main team. Drexthar, honorable mention because he can be a tank for your team if he's negative affinity and also place HP burn on Spiderlings. Granted, that is a much slower way to do it. And then Akoth the Seared, of course, who we mentioned alluded to earlier, is also an AoE HP burn akin to the likes of Tyrant Ixelmore. For the Undead Hordes, you're basically only going to be able to use Crypt King Grawl, but he's one of the champions who can actually solo like stage 20 and stuff like that, depending on affinities. I forget exactly which one, but he has an AoE HP burn, and then he can also place a freeze. So he does the freeze and the burn all in one champion, so he is capable of soloing with 4 pieces of food, if that is of interest to you. And then Knights Revenant, we already talked about Walking Tomb Drang being able to place the irresistible AoE HP burn. Dark Elves does not fit into that category. For debuffers, in case you want to run some sort of speed composition with triple Cold Heart and some debuffer, there's a couple of options you could use. For Demon Spawn, it would be Gorlos Helma, the Epic down here. For the Undead Hordes, unfortunately, your only option is Vlad the Nightborn. He's the only AoE decrease defense champion in the game. Arguably, you could use single target decrease defense and weaken, but there aren't that many options in any of these factions. For Dark Elves, you have Lydia, of course. You have Ghostborn for his irresistible decrease defense. And then there's an honorable mention of Spider, who has the weak version of weaken, but the big version of decrease defense. Granted, it's not 100% chance for the weaken, so he's not as reliable. But if you do have the, again, the new Nature's Bounty blessing on him, there is a chance that he can actually place the big version of decrease defense and weaken. So keep that in mind if you have him on your account. For the Knights Rev, debuffers are Tomb Lord, who we already kind of saw on my team, and then Thylesi in terms of the epics. For the support champions, this could be a lot of different things depending on the team that you want to fit them in. But Demon Spawn, once again, does have the majority of them. Kymar, of course, is the ultimate reset champion, much better than Renegade if you have him. Wither the Crown can keep your team healed up if need be. Duchess can revive people if they start to die to the poisons. Helicath can just protect your team. Block damage means they don't take any damage from the Spiderlings, but they will still have the poison ticks. Granted, they won't take the poison hits. And I almost forgot the epics and Demon Spawn. Achak the Winter, and of course we featured AoE freeze. During the Hunger, it can be a little bit of a reviver. A mini Duchess, if you want to think of it that way. That's a bit of a stretch of a description. And then Skimfos, I like to always mention, honorable mention, because he can steal turn meter from the Spider. So if you don't have Cold Hearts and you happen to have Skimfos, he can do the same turn meter control job, but he won't obviously do the enemy max HP hit. From the Undead Hordes, honorable mention to Skartorsus and Bad Alcazar because they can be cleansers for your team just to get rid of the poisons. Siphi is, of course, super powerful and basically everywhere, but block debuffs can block the poison ticks. UDK is unique in that once he's in the team, even if he's positive or negative affinity, his passive will steal all of the hits from the Spiderlings, so if you build him with enough resistance, he can also be the tank for your team if you want to run it that way. And so he's the only one taking damage while you deal with the Spiderlings with AoE HP burn or anything else going on. And then another honorable mention to Lich the Epic, used for the Rosin fusion, but he does have a single target turn meter depletion, and so he can once again be used to control the main Spider. The Dark Elves Blind Seer has a full AoE revive with block damage, so again, if people are starting to die, she can bring them back up. Visix, good ally protection to keep your team alive, but also once again, it can tank for the team with the AoE provoke, so stealing the aggro. Mithrala, super powerful, of course. Hex is a very easy way to be able to kill the Spiderlings if you're doing some sort of hard mode stage, but also of course being able to cleanse any poisons on your team or cleanse the sleep. And then for the epics, Caden, again another reviver for the faction, and Sylar, pretty good turn meter manipulation but also decreased speed, so she can be an excellent champion for like an old school type of turn meter control on the spider. And then Knights Rev last, we have Eric's, who's more of a DPS, but obviously she has the protection, or the protection of ally protection, and she can counterattack and potentially just heal herself if you have her in particular sets. White Queen and Cora is kind of the same thing as Mithrala, with the cleansing ability, and then putting up a little bit of a shield. Theodore, of course, we showcased AoE HP burn activation. This created monster, probably one of the best champions for old school in a normal mode spider, just again protecting your team, putting out a massive shield, because the more enemies there are, the bigger the shield just happened to be. Mind you, he's not as synergistic as Achak, because freeze makes enemies take, or it makes champions take less damage, and in order for Mystic Created Monster to have a sizable shield, you do have to build him for some amount of damage, so you're going to be also killing the spiderlings over time as he keeps using that ability, so keep that in mind. And then Record Wrath, always an honorable mention in terms of a support, once again being able to revive for your team as needed. So there you have it. That's my free to play strategy and recommendation for the Corrupted Spider Tournament. Let me know in the comment section down below if you do plan to participate in this particular iteration of the challenge tournaments, and what team you're going to be using and on what stage you're going to be using it. I do hope you guys have a fairly easy group. That way it makes it possible to compete for the potential of getting 6-star Relentless gear. And as always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. And if you enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to the channel for more content like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.